Welcome all. Um, we'll give everybody a minute or two to get into the room here and we'll get rolling. Really excited. It looks like we have a pretty huge crowd here. And we definitely have an exciting speaker. So just a second or two here and we'll get going. Welcome, everybody. Come on in and get your seat. Make yourself comfortable. We'll give them one more minute. All right, it looks like we have a full room. I'm sure some other folks will crowd in here in a minute. Welcome to everybody for this great presentation. I'm Dave Sly, Wild Virginia's Conservation Director, and I want to just give you a really quick introduction here. Remind you of some of what's happening. We are recording this program, and so the link will be available afterwards. You can watch it as many times as you want, share with your friends and your family. If you want to introduce yourself in the chat and tell us where you're coming from and who you are, that'd be great. During the program, all throughout, you can ask questions in the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to as many of those as possible at the end of the program. And then finally, you'll get an email afterwards that will give you the link to that video and some other great information that you can follow up with. Now, just want to quickly remind you that this is not all that Wild Virginia does. We have lots of great programs, lots of online things that you will enjoy. What Mike is going to talk about is very much in line with the things that we do every day. I work every day on water quality protections throughout the state, different ways that you can join with us in trying to make sure our waterways are protected. And I want to introduce Jessica Roberts, who is our connectivity director, and just give her the chance to say hi real quick.
Hi, thank you, Dave. Yes, and this talk is very much connected to the work that I do with Habitat Connectivity as well. Just to give you guys a resource, if you want to see some cute salamander tunnels under a roadway so salamanders can get to their vernal pool breeding grounds, I encourage you, I'll put it in the chat, the Habitat Connectivity Hub is a product of Wild Virginia, all different resources for habitat connectivity. And if you go to the wildlife crossing section, you'll see salamander tunnels right there. And those are in Charlottesville. So if you're in Charlottesville, you can go see those salamander tunnels that help them get to those vernal pools. And we're super excited for our guest speaker today. So thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to take down my screen, and in the process, well, I'm going to try to take down my screen. Okay, in the process, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Mike Hayslett. We're very honored to have him. I can say that Mike is one of the first people that I learned about when I started finding out about Wild Virginia. because I went on one of his hikes and learned an amazing amount in a short time about vernal pools. And he's just a wealth of information, and we're just honored to have him. You'll see as he proceeds here, just what a great resource he is, and what an amazing and kind of fascinating environmental feature we have here that most people don't know about. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Mike, if you're able to share your screen, and then just go for it.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Dave. Do you see my screen at this moment?
I do not.
Okay, let me go back here for just a second. I'm going to do this and try and do this in 10 seconds or less.
Okay.
Share screen. Do you see my screen now?
No.
Share. How about now?
There, it's coming up now. Woo.
Okay, let's see here. Should be, there's just a lot of stuff to negotiate here.
I know.
There's a button I need to get my fingers on, and it's covered up with stuff.
Uh-oh.
All right, let's see. So you see my screen, yes?
Yeah, we see your screen, but not in presentation mode yet.
Correct. Yeah, oops. Let's see. Let's try this. I seem to be, let me try this again. Let me start over. Let me reboot and see if it'll work better the second time. For some reason, I do not have my share to presentation button available. Please move this window away.
Shoot.
Yeah, for some reason I have lost function of the slideshow presentation button. Yikes.
Well done.
All right, I'm going to try this. You are screen sharing. I'm going to try this one more time. Sorry for the technical difficulties, folks.
That's the way. I think people have gotten a little bit used to this through the Zoom era.
Well, it's great when it works, and when it doesn't, it's time to sing and tap dance.
Yeah.
Please move this window away from the shared application. Okay, so yeah, for some reason I do not have.
Do you want to try exiting out and then hitting begin slideshow before you share your screen? Can you do that?
I'm sorry. Repeat that, please, Jess.
So try share hitting begin slideshow now on your slideshow, and then hit begin share screen. Sorry. Try that.
Gotcha. Do it here first. Right. Good thinking. All right. Awesome. Yeah, this is kind of what you get from asking old school ecologists to mess with technology. For some reason, my entire bar isn't available to me, so I can't seem to hit, that slideshow button. So I'm not sure why. For some reason, my entire bar is not available to me.
Well,
so that's a little frustrating. Worst case scenario, I can just use it. Suggestions. Worst case scenario, I would have to.
We can see the images. I mean, it might not be the optimum to have the slides over to the
Full
side.
screen.
At least we can see, the substance of it.
Okay, well, let me get started. If you can see this image, I will go ahead and get started. So the challenge here for me, in addition,
it's not up yet.
Pardon?
It's not up now.
Okay, let's go.
Try that one more time.
All right. Let's try this one more time. How about now?
Okay.
Okay.
It's trying to share.
You see the images now?
Okay. So we can see that. Okay.
Very good. Excellent. Okay, then we'll proceed in this manner. Is that okay?
Yep, that'll work.
That'll be all right?
That'll work.
Well, in addition to the technological challenge, my challenge is to carry you through 20,000 years of information in about 50 minutes. So hold on tight. This will be fast-paced. Vernal pools are a fascinating topic, and they have come into their own in a really relatively recent amount of time in the lexicon of natural resources and conservation issues in the eastern U.S. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background in that. I've been doing this for a very long time, and it's still just as fresh and fascinating to me as it was many years ago. I just thoroughly enjoy this particular type of environment. No two are alike, and they just seem to fascinate me endlessly, as well as the challenge that they present for their conservation and being involved in that for many years. I think one of the things that is intriguing about these environments is this juxtaposition of them being both an aquatic environment and a terrestrial environment. That was certainly the first thing that attracted my attention to them. And so it's fascinating to be familiar with sites and to visit them throughout different seasons and see the ecological changes in these environments from the dry phase to the wet phase, and what they accommodate in this range of environmental conditions. Okay, but what I would like to do is I want to start at the beginning. All right, I want to talk to you about what I believe is probably the single oldest extant ecosystem above ground in Virginia. And we often refer to these as vernal pools. Now, many folks are familiar with Maple Flats, which is on the National Forest in Augusta County. And that's probably my introduction to Wild Virginia, was conducting a field trip at this location. And I think many folks involved with the organization, we became acquainted through that. And so an area that was completely unknown on the National Forest a quarter century ago or so is now quite popular. Virginia Master Naturalist chapters come from all over to visit this place. And so this is probably the best known collection of what we call vernal pools that are ancient natural ecosystems. There have been 4 studies that have dated some of these Shenandoah Valley sinkhole ponds at 20,000 years of age. So that's kind of where that's sort of the starting point that I would like to use, is this idea that these are exceedingly old and unchanged ecosystems, presenting probably the best model of what an inland wetland should be like, should look like, and how it should perform. The only thing that has changed since the last ice age is the composition of the forest that surrounds these pools. So, but let me tell you about a couple others. Now, this is a site in the central Blue Ridge Mountains. It's an upland site. And, aside from the readings and being familiar with some of these core studies that have dated sites, one of the things that captured my attention early on in exploring these montane wetlands was that they turned out to be archaeological sites as well. And so even before you start pushing the dates out to as much as 20,000 years, wasn't unusual to see sites that you knew had to have been there at least for 4,000 to 5,000 years. This is a site in Amherst County that sort of came to be known in the circle of those folks who visited as Indian Pond. And it's a classic upland vernal pool, quite large and deep as mountain vernal ponds go. And what you'll note, can you see here in the bottom right-hand inset, David, is my pointer doing what it should do? So that is what archaeologists refer to as devotage. And it is to working stone to make lithic tools as sawdust is to a carpenter working boards. It's the leftover of the manufacture of stone tools. And this is found right beside this vernal pool. So somewhere probably around 4,000 years ago, some indigenous folks traveling the well-trodden Otter Creek pathway along the Blue Ridge to the James River crossing camped right beside this seasonal pond. probably bathed in it, probably drank its bitter waters, and manufactured tools. And so early on, I was well acquainted with the fact that these are very, very old ecosystems. This is a site on the National Forest in Highland County, and it's also pretty well known, Brown's Pond. And it's been dated at least twice in the past using pond core studies. The most recent one is somewhere between this time frame of 16 to 20,000 years before the present. I had the privilege of collaborating with the U.S. Geological Survey research team involved here. And just to simplify what we're looking at, this mountain pond, which has a seasonal hydrology, had a history of being filled and then opening up again and being filled again until ultimately it was plugged permanently. Now, here's what happened. During the last ice age, this vernal pond on the top of the ridge was in fact the vertical entrance to a cave system. And today, the cave that lies underneath this vernal pool is almost within view of the pond. I think it's referred to as Hornet Cave. I guess whoever explored it first had an unhappy experience. But this is a pond on top of a cave. Now, the Allegheny Highlands region where I'm from boasts three very distinctive and rare ecosystems: shale barrens, limestone caves, and mountain ponds, vernal ponds. Turns out in the Allegheny Highlands, the vernal ponds are very often connected to the caves. Think of them as the skylight, the former skylight to the cave. So what happened was when warming began to occur and melting and erosion and sediments flowing across the landscape, they find this vertical entrance. And when enough of those accumulate, they plug up the hole. Well, it cools again and it opens it up, and then it warms again and it plugs it again. And so ultimately what happens is sufficient sediments accumulate in this basin to plug up that hole permanently, and then it becomes a pond and is a pond for 16 to 20,000 years. So it's a fascinating history, and to realize that these vernal ponds, which are isolated wetlands, are in many cases, at least in the Highlands region, connected directly to a subterranean cave below. Well, that was a real eye-opener. So this speaks again to this ancient origin that goes back to the last ice age. These are some of the most pristine and oldest isolated ecosystems that I think exist in the landscape today. Now, one of the things that's fascinating is that, again, no two are alike. And the pools in the mountains are in the uplands and isolated, but also very commonly across Virginia, these vernal pools occur in the floodplains of streams. So there's sort of two basic contexts, either on the bottom or on the top. The flat landscape along the plains of streams or on the very tops of ridges. And they're highly variable. In fact, we have to acknowledge that the term vernal pool is rather subjective, and sometimes vernal pools are in fact artificial environments, human-created environments that have been naturalized and function the same way that vernal pools do. On the left here, that is a blown out lake from a hurricane event. And on the right here in one of our state parks was a feature inadvertently created by the CCC. But today, both of these function as vernal pools and support the wildlife associated with them. So that, I think, is one of the fascinating elements about them, is that these environments, though they have common features, no two are alike. And that presents challenges as well as opportunities when you're studying them, when you are trying to recreate them, or otherwise conserve them. Let me take you on a quick tour with some of the sites in my home region of the Allegheny Highlands. Now, what you'll note here is there's a string of red pins. Each of those represent a sinkhole or karst vernal pond in the mountains of the Alleghenies. And you notice how they align? That's because they are all on the Tonallaway limestone formation. So if you're familiar with the ridge and valley, these parallel valleys and ridges, etc., and the way the geological strata was buckled and aligned, this is some of the modeling by which we have discovered these rare environments. I'll show you, take you on a little armchair tour here. This site
Hey, Mike,
is,
can I break in
yeah,
just a second? I want to tell
please.
everybody that I know it's disappointing that you can't see these images better. When we send you the follow-up email, we're going to try to make available to you the PowerPoint in some form so that you can see these better, because it's just not fair to Mike not for you not to see the beauty of some of this stuff. So I'm sorry to break in, but I wanted to let you know we're going to do our best to make it possible for you to see it better.
No, I appreciate you saying that, Dave, and I just wish that I could figure it out on my end.
Could
But
you hit
frankly,
the
I've never.
view? Could you hit the view button? That was just an option.
Yep,
Hit that.
sure.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. I've never used Open Office, so I don't know.
Yeah,
Huh.
I'm sorry, and I don't know how to fix it, but again, we'll try to make sure at least people get a little bit better view of these in the follow-up. So sorry.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
thank you, Jess.
Or slideshow menu where it says slideshow at the top.
Yes. Gotcha.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
I don't.
there's something going on. It must have some kind of restriction potentially with sharing your screen. So, okay.
Yeah,
That's all right.
apologies.
That's okay. We will send
Well,
the Tuesday out.
here are some images of some of those Allegheny Highlands sinkhole ponds. This is on North Mountain. Here is one. Can you see that image a little bit? Are you able to see that image a little bit?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So this is a sinkhole pond in the mountains. This is a figure 8. This is a very shallow side of about 6 inches depth. Now I'm going to turn around 180 degrees and look behind me to the other side of this figure 8, and this part of the sinkhole basin is about 4 feet deep, sufficiently so that it is semi-permanent. So much like Maple Flats and the way the Shenandoah Valley sinkholes have such a variability that they create these different depths and hydroperiods and ecological dynamics, this occurs in the mountains as well. Here is one that to me is the quintessential ancient vernal pond. It is located in Bath County, and this is on a ridge where there is a cave in the vicinity, so this is a karst feature. But as I began to study this site, it has more of the representative species than any other vernal pool I've ever encountered in Virginia. I never got more than 6 until I came to Big Spring Vernal Pond in Bath County, and it has no less than 7 of the indicator species, and that's like the record for richness in the state of Virginia. Well, let me talk a little bit about some of the ecological significance of these sites, and I want to just touch on a few things that I think are key because the subject gets addressed a lot today. It's understood that these are sinks for biological diversity, and we hear a lot about the specialists, but it also serves generalists. And there's all the residential biota, and then of course there are migrants in season. So you can think of this as an oasis in a watershed. I also want to make some points about the generation of bioenergetics in a larger forest. I think of these as the powerhouses of a forest because they really produce a tremendous amount of energy. And one pool the size of your living room may serve an area of a half a square mile of forest. So to me, the perfect world would be a vernal pool every half mile. And if I have my way, that'll be my goal in terms of constructing additional vernal pools, is just to have one every half mile, and then the world will have the vernal pool ecological influence across it. So I want to mention a couple of things here about animals and plants and reproduction. Now, again, a great deal has been said about the indicator species or obligates, and we have nearly a dozen of those in Virginia. They are mostly amphibians, and what you'll note is that more than half of the list of species have some status of conservation concern in Virginia. There's an endangered species, there's a threatened species, and there are many that have very high conservation need. And that's because rare animals are found in rare environments, and rare environments host rare animals. There are additionally the freshwater shrimp that we are sort of fascinated with. Here is a spring fairy shrimp in a red version. The only time I've ever seen a cherry red fairy shrimp based on the diet of that critter. But most of my work over the years have been with the amphibians. I did my graduate work on this little critter here, which is a relict of the ancient South, being in Virginia swamps. But these are fascinating animals that are highly specialized to these environments, and we've heard a great deal about them as indicators. But I often like to remind folks that vernal ponds in the landscape, in a watershed, have this tremendous environmental service to all organisms, whether specialized or generalists. All of the resident wildlife that are in an area are going to benefit from these pools, as well as them harboring these highly specialized species. And of course, even a zoologist has got to bow to the significance of plants in ecosystems, and vernal ponds have some of our very rarest herbaceous plants, shade-loving, nondescript sedges, rushes, etc. So in terms of biota, these are some of the most fascinating places for unique species, for specialized species, as well as serving the broader environment. Now, let me speak to spawn, if I may, eggs. We amphibian biologists spend a lot of time counting eggs. And by using some fuzzy math, consistently try to estimate the relative size of populations. These are spotted salamander eggs here on the right. And what we wind up seeing are hundreds and hundreds. And the generations of herpetologists before us, they spoke of seeing tens of thousands. And this is a way we assess the health. But I want to speak to you for just a moment about the way that creates connectivity between what we think of as ecology in a bowl, an isolated or insular environment that really has this tremendous connection to the surrounding forest and to the watersheds in which they're found. Now, what you're looking at here, if you can see this, that is an aggregation of about 200 wood frog eggs. Now, let's do a little math. 200 eggs represent 200 mama wood frogs. And there's about 4 daddies to every mama. So if we multiply 200 by 5, what you're looking at is the result of somewhere around 1,000 breeding adults converging on that one small pool and reproducing, and that's all the spawn. So that represents over 250,000 eggs right there. There's about 300,000 eggs right there. Now, here's the part that might surprise you. The rate of survivorship of these eggs to adult animals is about 1%. What that means is that 99% of what you see there in that pool goes to feed the rest of the world in the community of this vernal pool. So that's a huge amount of biomass that's being introduced into this environment every year that fuels the trophic levels and disperses energy created in the aquatic realm into the terrestrial realm. And so this energy is getting carried all around the landscape. And that's probably one of the most basic but important ideas in understanding the connectivity. Speaking of understanding, I would like to submit to you that I think the vernal pool concept gets started at Walden Pond. Now, this is a wonderful little book that was given to me by Virginia Native Plant Society. And you'll have this link in the follow-up email that you'll receive. And so I'd encourage you to get your hands on this, of woodland pools, spring holes, and ditches, journal excerpts from Thoreau's writings. So Thoreau, before the Civil War in America, is calling vernal pools spring holes, among some other colorful monikers. And that's probably where we first are drawn by a naturalist, a natural scientist, to appreciate what otherwise might be thought of as just a mosquito-infested mud hole. And then in the early 20th century, along comes Robert Frost, also a New England poet, right, in Massachusetts, and his wonderful spring pools, spring pool, vernal pool. And Robert Frost, 100 years ago, had a command in an understanding of the basic process of evapotranspiration, by which trees drink up and blot out the flowery waters of vernal pools. For myself, from my own experience, it all began with me in childhood with a vernal pool located in my neighborhood, known as the Devil's Den by generations before me. Here it is in the wet phase, in the dry phase. So I could hike to the top of the ridge in my hometown in Allegheny County, and here was this isolated pond that in winter would be full of water, and I would jump a duck off of it. And then in the summertime, I'd go back, it'd be a dry glen with snakes under rocks. And so it just fascinated me, that juxtaposition. Now, as I came into my own as a young biologist and began to return to this site that had fascinated me as a kid, I began to look at it through an ecologist's eyes, and I realized that of all the thousands of sites I had explored around Virginia, it was undergoing some changes that were quite distinctive, and I hadn't seen this in other sites. So I began to study it a little more closely. Here it is, my hometown, top of the ridge, this isolated pond, the result of a karst landscape. This is a water tank, and without getting into the story, that human impact was part of what began to change this natural pool, that and climate, alterations to the climate. So it began really to eutrify very slowly. David, I am realizing that I now don't have control of getting to the next slide. Yeah. I have run out of my ability to go to the next slide. So the site you're looking at here began to change over a few decades, both from some human impact as well as climate change. And it began to grow a stand of persimmon trees, and it began to grow very dense stands of green briar. And when I took my own father there, who had played as a boy in this same vernal pond, the generation before me, it was remarkable to hear him comment on the contrast in what he remembered and what we were seeing. And so I began not only some intensive research, but it led to a conservation practice of restoring this site. We might have to shift to questions because
Okay. Before you do that, maybe try the old thing of stop sharing and then share again.
Yeah, and maybe exit out of
Yep.
Your PowerPoint application and see if you can get it back up. If you can't get it back up,
second.
Yeah, you might be able to save it as a PowerPoint or a PDF, and we can view it that way.
Yeah, I'm turned off.
Okay. Be patient with us, folks. You can ponder what you've learned already, which I've already learned a lot. I thought I knew a fair amount. Okay, you're back on screen now. Can you change now? Okay. Okay, you're back on screen. See what you can do.
Yep.
Yeah, I think your computer's probably just overwhelmed, so we'll give it. This is good.
It just changed, so.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Are you able to hear? Okay, very good. Apologies again, folks. This site began to change ecologically over the course of some decades. And so what I did was make a decision then to do an offset. And this was done manually so that it could be done with quality. And vegetation management set this back to prevent the very slowly progressing eutrophication that was changing that site. And today it is far healthier biologically just by that intervention, which illustrates, what you can do with a little bit of determination and conservation mindset. The first time I showed that site to someone of significance was, well, it was a few years ago. You can tell by the quality of this photo. But these were my guests from Massachusetts, and the gentleman here with the furry white face, Leo Kenny of Massachusetts, is probably who we owe credit to for bringing the vernal pool concept to the East. He was a high school biology teacher who trained his students to inventory these pools, and they really started our appreciation and our understanding of these environments. I've had the privilege of working with a lot of folks over the years, and I just have to pause and recognize my good friend Steve. He presented in this series recently, and I've been through many years and many different versions of promoting vernal pools, but the photography that Steve does has created a whole new generation of awareness at a level of intimate exposure to the microcosm of these environments under the water. It's just kind of, well, it's still blowing my mind. So kudos to Steve. Please check out his work. It is remarkable. And I'll extend the invitation again, Dave. If Steve is interested in co-leading a field trip with me for Wild Virginia, I'd love to do it.
We'll have to look into that.
All right, let's talk not connectivity, but negativity for just a moment. We have to acknowledge that in the history of Virginia under European occupation, more than half of the freshwater wetlands in the interior of Virginia have been lost, and particularly the smaller ephemeral ones that could more easily be destroyed in a day's time. So the removal of forests is one impairment. But there is, of course, a history of wetlands being drained and filled. And what we understand now is that even the removal of the forest, the removal of what is considered the critical upland habitat, where all of these amphibians reside, who then come and mate to the pool, is a drastic handicap to these environments. So, when I'm talking to foresters and watershed professionals like I was last week and ask them, okay, if you know what stream management zone is, then help me start preaching for a vernal pool management zone. And this is well-established research, mostly based out of New England, that's been around for quite some time. And it's based on research on the extent of movement of amphibians born in these environments out to the surrounding forest where they reside. So again, what I mentioned was that there's a half a square mile of forest that the vernal pool has influence over in terms of energy production, because that's how far out some of these amphibians go. These links will be in the follow-up so that you can do some more research into this area. This is why conservation at the grassroots level is so important. Here's a great little project I was honored to be a part of. This is an NGO up in Northern Virginia, Loudon. And after finding an area in their county that had a large complex of sinkhole wetlands, they pursued the acquisition of this property, and they now own an 87-acre preserve, the first of its kind in Virginia, dedicated just preserving a complex of 13 vernal pools in Loudoun County. So grassroots conservation can't be underestimated in terms of how important it is to these environments. Well, let's speak for just a moment about where we are with the climate crisis and what it means for vernal pools. This is an article you might want to read that came out a few years back about the uncertainty for seasonal wetlands. Habitat loss is probably the greatest threat, but there are also changes now that are related to the way the climate crisis has affected our weather. In short, a vernal pool or spring pool is driven by precipitation, by snow in winter and spring and fall rains. And rainfall has unraveled, it has run amok. And the predictability in rainfall is anybody's guess anymore. And that has a direct impact on the hydrological cycle of these systems. Now, consider, if you will, this delightful little site in the Allegheny Highlands. Here is what it should look like in the spring. Here it is in that same year. And what you'll note is it is here dry when it should be wet, and here wet when it should be dry. And this is an illustration of what we've been experiencing with rainfall, either too much or not enough. And that inconsistency, that unpredictability is really has the potential to impact these environments, because the amphibians in particular, their ability to use these environments to reproduce is also tied to the seasonality of rain. Right now, tropical rains, marbled salamanders, dry vernal pools, that's the way things should be. So this is something that we've been studying a long time and are trying to kind of figure out in terms of how we should invest our energy. And I'll speak to how my own mission involving trying to create or restore pools is addressing that. A lot of education over the years, a lot of exploration and fun, worked with lots of partners, both agencies and organizations. And for myself, more than 20 years now, I've also been involved in wetlands construction. This gentleman here is my own mentor, as Tom Biebighauser, the author of several books about building vernal ponds and restoring wetlands. This is a project we did at Sweet Briar College when I was there 8 years. So part of that mission is not only preserving existing pools and restoring those wetlands that have been impaired, but also designing, based on this model, this perfect ancient model, wetlands that can serve in our watersheds to increase biological diversity, to increase connectivity, and to raise water quality in watersheds and larger landscapes. So I myself have enjoyed, constructing, designing a lot of these projects. I've worked with industrial partners, private landowners, agencies. In recent years, spent a little time working with the U.S. Forest Service to not only inventory across more than a quarter million acres of national forest in the Western Highlands, trying to locate these rare vernal pools, as well as other water features, and get them on the radar of the U.S. Forest Service, so that as they create forest management plans, these sites get a fair shake. They get an adequate consideration, especially for buffers, for forested buffers around them. So over 200 sites. Here's a couple. This is the typical wildlife water hole, constructed wetland. Many times they function in the place of a vernal pool. Sometimes they don't. Depends on the design. But there are also preserved on our public lands many very high quality ancient wetlands. And sometimes they harbor some of the rarest of our biota. This is a site with the federally endangered northeastern bulrush. And I should point out to you that when we use this term vernal pools, it's not necessarily the same vernacular that the botanists and ecologists use. when describing or naming a natural community. But all of those natural communities, which we would also refer to as vernal pools, they are all considered globally rare. That's worth noting. And of course, while with the Forest Service, there were opportunities to again do these little interventions that make a big difference. Here is a nice little sinkhole on top of the ridge in the Westminster Chapel area of Bath County. And if you'll notice right here, this site was subject to locals driving their ATVs and making a mess out of this pretty pool. So my Forest Service colleagues and I came along. We dropped some trees across this to prevent the ATV access. And by the very next spring, when this cleaned up, why, there were 4 obligate species happily reproducing. Delicate fairy shrimp, marbled salamander tadpoles. So sometimes it just takes a little effort, and you can get these sites back into working order. And so since this spring, I've been working full time now as a consultant in this arena that I've spent so many years. And I just want to, put the offer out there to help you and to help your organizations and agencies put more water in the landscape in these wild environments, to bank water against an uncertain future with simple and direct approaches to restoring wetlands. Let me show you real quick a project currently ongoing that's just been such a delight. This is on the lower Cowpasture River, part of the Joint Chiefs project that had a lot of money, and we got a little jingle out of the Department of Forestry to do some wetlands construction. This private farm owner, very interested in ducks. So the largest of the vernal pools that we built for him was about a half-acre marsh for ducks. Here it is, complete and functioning. Beautiful little environment. This site is located on both sides of the Cowpasture River. We put wetlands on this farm in 3 different locations, about 8 different wetlands. I'll show you some real quick before and after photographs. Here is a site before and after construction. That's a functioning vernal pool. Now, I will note these were put in areas where there had been wetlands historically in the floodplain of the Cowpasture River, and where there were remnants of the populations of amphibians that we often associate with them. So spotted salamanders, wood frogs. And so this is in part also restoring habitat so that those populations can regrow, can rebound. Anybody know what large woody debris is? Large woody debris. That's a little trade secret. The installation of leaves and limbs and logs jumpstarts the aquatic environment. Natural resource work is fun. It's hard work, but it's fun. I'm not putting out a fire here. I am watering the cardinal flower colony that we translocated in the course of building a pool. Right? And of course, as I told my riparian colleagues last week, planting buffers is a key to restoring these environments back to the forested wetlands that they were. So this is riparian restoration, but specifically through creating and restoring and enhancing vernal pools. How's our time?
We should try to get into questions and answers in the next minute or 2 here, if you can.
Yeah, I wanted to give a little bit more time. But
Perfect.
We're doing good.
I only need about 45 seconds.
Beautiful.
The individual for whom we built these 8 wetlands loves to use his remote cameras. And what he has captured beside these constructed vernal pools that we've made, using it illustrates this concept that if you build and restore these environments, they will definitely get used. Here's some nighttime critters. Here's some daytime critters. I have built a vernal pond for a river otter. That was a first. Plenty of bears, love to visit the vernal pools. Lots of songbirds, surprisingly, right beside a vernal pool. Raptors like hawks love to eat frogs. Here's some other birds. Oh, was he delighted when wood ducks visited his new vernal pool. Here's an interesting image. Oh boy. Here is a duck in the mouth of a coyote on the side of the constructed vernal pool in the winter. Here's one of my favorites. This is the bear selfie. But it just goes to illustrate that with the appropriate assistance, we can restore these environments, and we can add what I often call facsimiles based on the model, designing from the model these ancient systems to not only improve water quality, but to create important sinks of connectivity between the aquatic and the terrestrial realm. Okay, I am more than happy to take some questions.
Okay, that's wonderful. Mike, thank you so much. And I'm going to move through some of these questions just to remind people. You'll get Mike's email, and if we can't get to your question or if something else comes up, you can follow up. One question is, are all vernal pools found in karst landscapes, or do they occur in other parts of Virginia?
Oh my goodness, they are from the mountains to the shore. In First Landing State Park, among the sand dunes, there are vernal pools within a short walk of the Atlantic Beach. On the western fringe of Virginia, there are vernal pools in the spruce zone, the Canadian type forests, and in the Allegheny Highlands region. I'm amazed to find sinkhole underlain wetlands at 4,000 feet elevation. Wow. In between, there's virtually no major stream floodplain that doesn't have some of these isolated wetlands. So they're in many different contexts, and it depends on the geology and the soils of the region, but they are all across the state. And it would take me a 5-day course called the Spring Pools Institute to give you a full understanding of how variable these are. I would actually do this training in different regions of the state, because what you'd find in the coastal plain would be very different from Shenandoah Valley or the Allegheny Mountains. So highly variable, as is the nature of Virginia.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So somebody asked, did the caves, and obviously this is where they're associated with caves, did the caves form before or after the pools? Is the process that formed the pools the same process that formed the caves below them?
It is related. So my colleagues tell me that most of the caves over there are about 2 million years old. And again, at the end of the Ice Age, at about 20,000 years ago, as the ice melted, sediments began to be released and flow into these cave entrances and plug them up. And then they function for 16 to 18,000 years as an isolated pond by holding water on top of a hard pan of sediments. So they are still connected in some cases to caves not far below the surface, but there is a door that shuts them off between the subterranean cave and the surface, and that is the hard pan of sediments or clay. In the Shenandoah Valley, those sinkhole ponds that have sediments or clays, their limestone is sometimes 300 feet below the surface. In the Alleghenies, it might only be 100 feet below the surface. So some of these vernal pools over in the mountains will dry out quicker because they are losing water below ground, as well as through evaporation above and through the trees drinking.
Okay. Here's another one. What impact have you been seeing from invasive plants on vernal pools?
Not too often. That's a very good question. Not too often. I have seen over the decades a few changes in plant communities, and that's pretty unusual. That's why my boyhood pool, as it changed over the course of about a half century and began to grow a really dense stand, of persimmons and a just a tremendously dense surrounding of green briar, that kind of stopped me in my tracks. So these environments are stable enough, but the unanswered question for us is, what will changing the hydrology of these through climate change related rainfall unpredictable, what will that do to things like the plant community over time, or in sort of a more immediate concern, how will that impact animal groups like amphibians? They're tied directly to how rainfall, modifies the timing of these environments.
Okay. Are any of these pools historically created by beavers? Are beavers allowed to create pools to stay in the landscape?
The only rule in nature is that every rule can be broken. There's a long-standing history of connection between spotted salamanders and beavers. And one of these days I would make a great essay. But beavers will dam up headwater streams and create ponds, and spotted salamanders can take advantage of those big beaver complexes while they exist, maybe a half century. And I've seen spotted salamander populations balloon to remarkable numbers, and then the beaver dam blows out, and then those spotted salamanders are kind of out of luck. They no longer have a breeding pond. So I think there are cycles there that have been going on for centuries and even millennia. As long as a brook trout doesn't swim upstream and get into the beaver pond, that would be bad news for the amphibians, as vernal pools are typically fishless environments.
Okay. Do constructed pools serve as breeding sites for mosquitoes?
An excellent question, and one that is on the minds of most. Not if they are properly designed. A well-designed wetland destroys mosquitoes. Now, this is about a 45-minute talk in the 5-day long professional training that I call the Spring Pools Institute. And there's two things here. The history of wetlands destruction, drainage, and handicapping in America did more to promote mosquitoes inadvertently than it did to destroy them. And that's partly why we associate. A healthy wetland has a biological community that controls mosquitoes. If a vernal pool lasts for at least 3 months, it's got the predators in there to devour the mosquitoes. So the answer is, if it is well designed, executed, healthy, etc., it is in fact destroying mosquitoes, not promoting.
Okay. What would you say is, oh, hold on, it shifted on me. What would you say is the biggest threat to vernal pools, and what's the best way to counter that?
The biggest threat is loss of habitat. Over the years I've been involved, I've seen vernal pools destroyed. I've seen them obliterated. I can take you to parking lots right now that used to be these fantastic wetland environments. So the loss of habitat is really the biggest threat. And I counter that by building them, by creating facsimiles of these habitats. So that's what we can help you do. You write me, drop me an email, Virginia Vernal Pools LLC. Here's the commercial. This is what we do. We help not only to understand and preserve, but we're trying to help. The mission is really to try and help offset the loss of habitat by replacing some of these habitats that have been lost. So if you build it, they will come.
Okay, I'm going to try one more. And again, I have to apologize for people. I know we can't get to all these, but you'll know where to find Mike, and he has so much information, so don't be afraid to follow up. But let's try this one. When you create a new vernal pool, do you rely solely on natural population, or do you also seed egg masses?
That's a really good question. I will preclude it by just reminding folks, please drop me an email. Anyone that has a question, vernalpools@gmail.com. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We post about 3 posts weekly. And a lot of the projects that we're doing are great opportunities just to walk through all of the fascinating details, not only about the ecology, but about how we conserve these. So what I really prefer, the ideal scenario for me is when someone invites me to take a look at their land, whether it's public or private, and say, we're considering putting in wetlands. If I find remnants of the populations of these obligate animals, that's the perfect scenario, because they're just waiting for you to put that breeding portion of their habitat back in the landscape, and then they will explode. And so it's literally, I sometimes joke and say I'm a frog farmer in just creating the habitat that is the vessel to enable these populations to have both the terrestrial and the aquatic aspects of their habitat, and then they can just go to town and reproduce, and you can regrow those populations and get them back to levels that can better support the larger ecosystem of those watersheds. That's why I say my dream would be to have, a vernal pool every half mile. That'd be a perfect world, because of those powerhouses that serve a very large portion of the surrounding landscape, both forest and watershed.
Okay. Well, we've passed 8 o'clock, and so sadly, I think we're going to have to sign off here pretty quick. I have to thank Mike again. Amazing presentation, and thank all of you for being here and for really smart questions. We get really smart audiences here with Wild Virginia. So